Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.
I've come today to a place called Barton Stacey. Well, I didn't choose Barton Stacey directly. I chose to drive half an hour, sort of 3/4 of an hour from my base and go south instead of west, which is where I usually go. And I instantly realised as I turned off the road and went to try and find a footpath, which is the way I usually do these photo walks, that I kind of cut my opportunity in half. And what I mean by that is one side of the road is where the military have a firing range, and there's one red flag up today, and the other side, well, that's where I can go play. What side do you think I've chosen? So here I am in open countryside. Beautiful sunny day. Yesterday was really rainy, and I was intending to go out on my walk, and I thought, why am I going to walk through a mist of rain when tomorrow's forecast looks beautiful? Cold, but beautiful. So expect some contrasty pictures today from my collection, at least. A letter to start with, which we don't usually do. One from Joseph Vashi. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Joseph. Neil, I don't regularly write into anything I hear or see on radio, TV or podcasts. And in my 43 years of being on this earth, or do we call it Earthland on this show, I've only felt moved to write or phone in on a handful of occasions. And one of those probably doesn't count, as it was New Year's Eve 2019. I called into a radio station to compete in the KZ Brain of the Decade. And let's just say my consonants and vowels were a bit of a jumble. So I thought it safer to write this time. I've just listened to your first episode of the year, and you read out a mail from Madison Thorne, and I was really moved by her COVID project endeavours, and hope that you have her on the show as soon as you said you might. I suggest every one of your listeners go look at highriskhumans.com. It's a show of courage, first up, but also just how important photography can be as a medium when it comes to documenting those who otherwise might not have enough of a voice to make a difference. And I speak as one of those with type 1 diabetes also. So you can imagine why it resonated with me. It's the kind of collective project that should be shared with students to show what picture making, as you say, can truly do, rather than this incessant chase for affirmation and likes. All the best from Joseph. Well, I'll tell you the truth, Joseph. I was moved too, and if you're wondering because you didn't hear last week's start of the year show, who and what Joseph was or is referring to, let me repeat just a small segment of Madison's letter to me. Hi, I'm Madison Thorne, and I'm a third-generation photographer who's been doing this professionally for 10 years. I'm also a type 1 diabetic. During a protest in 2020, where people demanded businesses reopen, a woman held up a sign that said, "Sacrifice the weak," referring to the high risk, those with underlying medical conditions most likely to be taken by COVID. I decided to create a photo series to show them exactly who they were willing to cast aside when they said that. I spent most of 2020 interviewing my fellow high-riskers in my community, but the goal of the series quickly became to promote empathy and kindness towards your neighbours during these incredibly trying times. Well, that was the letter. What Madison came out with was a photography interview piece, which is really impressive for all manner of reasons. So yes, I think I was moved before you, Joseph. Not that it's a competition, because I read Madison's letter and I invited her immediately to be a guest to talk about this photo project. And when I say immediate, I mean immediate, because I'm talking with her today.
And so kind of with this crazy idea in my head, I just texted a couple friends and I said that we're high risk. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing here, but can I photograph you? Like, yes, absolutely. And it turned into interviews as well, because I wanted to not only share their picture, I wanted to share their story.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today 2 special guests, Madison Thorne, who you heard there, and Dennis Skyam, a Danish photographer who's contributed much to this show in the way of pictures and stories. And just before Christmas, I ordered his book, the intriguingly titled Hey, Look at This! And since we talk often about publishing and self-publishing, I wanted to share his thoughts about just that and ask him more about his picture making. It's long overdue. I'm hoping it just may move you to want to print your own work, as he's a photographer who's really worked only in the digital field up to now, insofar as how he shows his work. Plus, of course, we have inspirational words, as always, from other photographers who've appeared already, including the street photographer Valerie Jardin, the adventure photographer and cyclist Daniel Hughes, and London commercial photographer and inventor of great photographic ideas, Charlie Clift. It's a podcast with a difference. You and I with our cameras, an open path ahead of us, and a bunch of letters sharing thoughts and feelings about making photographs. And I'll tell you more about what the letters have today in a moment. My friends at mpb.com are very precious to this show. As you know, they are the #1 platform in the UK and the US and Europe when it comes to buying and trading and selling quality used kit online. They help photographers like you and like me to tell your unique stories by giving you a safe place to buy, trade and sell used kits. And in doing so, you are a part of the sustainable circular economy. Right now, we're collecting your questions for their product specialists to help you if you want to trade. Is there kit you need help deciding about? Perhaps you're wondering about going mirrorless. What about lenses? Should you go prime? Should you stay zoom? And. Send your questions to studio@photographydaily.show, and from Feb, we'll start to answer a question every single week. Our patrons are a lifeline to this show as well, and we'll hear about a couple of them later on. And so what are we talking about from your letters? Well, one letter in particular underlines entirely why photography can provide the ultimate solace. We talk about never, ever, ever, ever giving up. Also, the things photographers don't like to hear and how you can, perhaps answer them. For me, that's somebody clicking their fingers at you in garçon fashion. Oi, photographer, over it, don't get me started. We talk about being freelance, running out of your creative mojo. If you've ever thought about starting a 365, I have an amazing guide for you, or rather a guide to introduce you to, and why vintage cameras can be magnets for conversation with people you'd never usually expect to talk with. Shall we walk then? Coffee and Garibaldi's packed? Check. Boots on? Laced? Check. Warm walking pants? Check. Spare batteries? Check. Fillmore cards? Check. Earbuds in? Check. Lens caps off? Let's walk. Right, before we get to the first letters of today's Photowalk, it's a beautiful bright blue sky day today. I did duck away from the miserable day that was yesterday. It was grey and there was that kind of like bourgeois rain. Bourgeois rain? What on earth are you talking about, Neil? That kind of like, it kind of sort of falls on you. It's kind of, it's not rain, but it's kind of like a constant mist of it. And you end up sort of probably being more rain soaked than you would be on a rainy day. I hope that makes sense. But it's a blue sky day today. All the aircraft, as you can hear, all the private craft, they've decided to go up today as well. They're going to be buzzing us, aren't they, during the photo walk? But as I'm walking along the path, I've got to be careful of my shadow, actually. It's the only problem about a very sunny day. You find yourself on a path where the shadow's doing the wrong things. Yeah, the sun's going the wrong way. Here we go. Here's my opening shot of the day. F4, shutter speed 1000th. It's just the gates, old iron rusty gates to a farmer's field, but I like the fact that the shadow's going it's cutting through the frame in a diagonal sense. There we go. And actually, if I turn to my left 90 degrees, I quite like it when you come across these they're a blight on the landscape, I know, often, but power lines that sort of, in the middle of nowhere, these are literally, where on earth are these going? But they're low power, not the huge power lines, these are just telegraph poles, but I like the way that we've got angles wires going in one way, coming 90 degrees out the other way. 1800 shutter speed, f4, ISO 160. There we go. First couple of shots of the day. Right, just before I read the first mail of the week, or actually it's the second, I suppose, I should say that Joseph's thoughts about the search for likes is equally relevant today, because Dennis Skyam, who is my second guest, had an Instagram account followed by, well, it had 100,000, definitely had a six-figure in the follow count. But one day, he decided the likes thing, the follower thing, was getting in the way of enjoying curating pictures. And so he just deleted the whole account. Bing. Just like that. Gone in an instant. And that kind of plays into your words as well today, Joseph. Also, coming up soon, look, all the mails are important, but I was truly floored by a mail I received mid last week, a story of real resilience, from which on the writer's website I found the most inspiring title for a blog post. It's this. Write this down. I quickly realised I may not be able to add days to my life, but I was determined to add life to the remainder of my days. Well, that story is coming up shortly. Right, mails. Let's take two. One about finding confidence to support your work, and one on confidence generally as a creative, even as a top famous one. First letter then from Damien Lyle. Neil, I came across this during the week on Wix.com. 13 things you should never say to a photographer. My personal bugbear as an event photographer is being asked to present everything the next day. Now, sometimes that works, or has to work, because for events, for example, can be rolling projects like conferences, where your pictures on one day play into the next as a kind of wrapping. But I thought you might be interested to read this, as I'm sure you face these questions from time to time. Right, well, I'm not going to read them all, but here's an idea of the feature with the suggested replies. It's just a couple of shots. Can't you give us a discount? Suggested reply. If I was a lawyer, would you say it's just a couple of pages? I don't think so. Blimey, I'm not so sure I could be that brazen, but I think this photo will look great in black and white. Suggested reply. You know what else used to look good in black and white? Cinema in the 1900s. It was also silent. I mean, that's effectively a put-down line on a comedy stage, isn't it? Can you make a portrait photo of me for free? I'll tell everybody it was made by you. Suggested reply. The compensation I like to receive for my work should only be exchangeable for products like pizza or tripods. I suppose the latter one I've had a few times in my career. I always run a mile if somebody says, do the work for free. I'll make it worth your while in terms of publicity. I mean, it sounds great, but rarely is someone being, in my honest opinion, or my humble opinion, genuine about the time they'll need to invest in you. They really just want cheap portraits, or free ones at that. Interesting they're on Wix, so thank you for that, Damien. Here's a lovely, what's this up here? This bird song here. Now, I'm using a new microphone. I'm trialling this shotgun microphone, which is a lovely Sennheiser shotgun microphone. So when I point it, if I do find something, in the past when I'm using my iPhone 8 Plus, which I've always used for these programs, if I point the iPhone 8 in the air, you get everything, including the 737 in the corner. But with this shotgun microphone, I should be able to really isolate the sounds. All right, and here's one I spied in the Facebook group, which I thought was worth mentioning for good reason. Just a quick message from Rob Wiskin that I saw, that I think to various degrees, many of us will recognise as creatives, photographers, etc. et al. Rob wrote alongside a super documentary picture taken in streets around his home, I assume. A black and white journal picture of our times in many respects, made on the streets. Having a moment, says Rob. Well, a long moment, as in the last few weeks, where I'm looking back at all my pics to share on here and other platforms, but not liking anything. Does anyone get like this sometimes? Just looking through and thinking, meh. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts following that short message, because I think, as I say, we all go through this to an extent, don't we? There's a famous author who's written about not liking any of his books after he's finished them, and for the life of me, he's that famous, I can't remember his name, but I'm sure I saw him interviewed on the telly only quite recently. But it's a very real thing amongst creative people, isn't it? The continual search for that holy grail photo or painting, or, well, insert creative thing you can make here. It's that elusive thing, isn't it? But Rob, it seems you are in good company. Not that necessarily makes you feel better about this. I mean, here's an interesting thing I sourced about something known as the quality gap. Scott Birkin is an author and a speaker about such things. I'll link to him on the show page today, and I have written to him. He's not replied to me yet, but I'm hoping he might. And he seems actually the kind of person in 2022, really, I'd like to interview. I want to extend the kinds of guests that we talk with. And he said even the most brilliant, let's say, artists here still experience insecurity about what they produce. And you can substitute artist, I suppose, for photographer easily. Your work is unlikely to ever live up to your expectations, no matter how hard you work on it. That's simply a fact of life for creative people. And here's a perfect example that Scott found. It's music, but it works. Bruce Springsteen once called the Born to Run album the worst piece of garbage he'd ever heard. And he didn't want to release it. So, there's a fairly big name suffering from the same. So let's try and expand on that one if we can. I'd be fascinated to read your thoughts. Send your letters to studio@photographydaily.show. That includes, by the way, photographs that you make on your own photo walks. I love to receive them, and they make the show page very colourful, or sometimes very black and white, but you know what I mean. Right, motivation. Loosely around the word play, which we've now started to investigate more. Here's a guest from episode 76, the commercial photographer Charlie Clift, who's a very inventive photographer. I'll give you an example. He's moving portraits. On his website, you'll see a grid of faces beaming out at you. Very well composed, beautiful portraits. Here and there, you'll see one of them moving, hence moving portraits. It's quite Potteresque in many respects, but it's fantastic, and just really simple ideas that he engages with on his website within his work that are it's all about play and about experimentation, about being open to just seeing where stuff goes, to renew mojo, and even play into, well, in his case, his business.
I love doing new things. I find that really exciting. Ultimately, I work in the creative industries, and I think you should be creative. And although there are some people out there who make a whole career doing pretty much just one kind of photograph, for me, I love the chance to experiment and do something different. It's lovely to be able to just have the freedom to create in a lot of what I do, and often I find if you come up with a new idea, then someone commissions you off the back of that to do something a little bit related and a bit different. And I think ultimately, if you haven't done it already, no one's going to commission you to do it. And so a lot of the way I progress and create is helpful not only for my soul and making me feel better and excited about what I do, but it also helps my business and helps my business grow too.
The amazingly inventive, talented Charlie Clift. It would be fantastic to talk to Charlie again on the show, because there's some new work of his that I'd love to have a chat with him about. Right, pictures. Let me make some more. There's the great thing about a very contrasty day. The sunshine is really strong here. First of all, it's bursting through the naked trees here. Through the branches, the twigs, and I love that kind of shot when you get the well, you've seen me on the show page before. It's certainly a staple dart of when I go into woodland, trying to get the sun streaming through trees, get that sort of that flare look. Here's one, shutter speed 2000, f4, 160 ISO. I'm just sort of rocking slightly to the left and right as I try and get this flare just in the right place, peeking through the branches, but, leaving enough detail of the tree in there. I think I've got it just there. Oh, no. I moved slightly. There we go. Perfect. And if I look ahead of me, there's the path just weaving away in the distance, which I quite like. So let me get one of that. These are very, very sketchbook images, aren't they, really? 1400 shutter speed, f4 again. I'm on f4 all the time. And ISO 160. And then to my right, Neil, slow down. Wow, so much to show you. There's a field here with... the sun is behind me now, and it's casting this wonderful shadow of this tree. I should probably do my tree recognition here. Try and get out onto from the path, just at the other side of this hedge into the field. And I just want to isolate this tree, the shadow of the tree. It is wonderful. Look at that. 1250 shutter speed, f4, 160 ISO. I don't want any of the horizon I don't want the sky or anything. I just literally want, I've just seen my own shadow there. Oh, that's rather exit. Ooh, hang on, if I step to my right slightly, yeah, then I'm obscured by another tree's shadow. And, better still, there's a bit of foliage in front of me to make a dirty foreground as well. Let's see what that looks like later on. Right, remember that quote a moment ago I read? Let me repeat it for you. I quickly realised I may not be able to add days to my life, but I was determined to add life to the remainder of my days. When I read that on this website I read it from, it was one of those flash moments of, so right. Those sort of moments that makes you think about your own attitude in life, doesn't it? Well, I'm continually floored and flattered in equal measure, genuinely. Meeting you for the first time by mail with your stories and what you share. The pictures coming in from your own Photowalks are incredible. And then I had this only the other day, a letter from Niels Armelinks, from which that quote a moment ago, it's on his website. Hi Neil, around 6 months ago I stumbled upon your podcast as I was and am spending a huge amount of time travelling to and from hospital in Manchester. It's been a great listen to accompany me on these drives and never fails to inspire me. Well, thank you very much. At the age of 30, as an otherwise fit and well individual, I was diagnosed with advanced bowel cancer and given no more than 5 years left to live. Well, we're now around 4.5 years into this turbulent journey, with endless cycles of chemo, 7 rounds of surgery and a bout of radiotherapy. But I'm pleased to say that despite the odds being stacked against me, I am still here, still smiling, and most importantly, it's made me rediscover my love for photography. I thought I should reach out, as there are a number of elements that are frequently brought up throughout the show that resonate highly with me. First of all, I fully appreciate how photography can allow you to find solace during times of hardship, how it can give you a sense of purpose, and how it can be a powerful tool to foster mindfulness and to take your mind off the stresses and tribulations of daily life. I bought my first camera at the age of 16 when I was looking for a tool to document my adventures in the mountains whilst on long-distance treks. After I foolishly forgot this camera on a Pyrenean bus, oh no, I upgraded to my first DSLR. Well, something good came out of it then, a Nikon D70. And since then I've gone through a different number of systems, as I believe variety is the spice of life. But I must admit, I haven't always been as active with my photography as I am now. Suddenly, with time becoming increasingly precious, I wanted to once again focus on documenting life's adventures through the medium of photography, and for my pictures to act as an inspirational legacy, predominantly intended for my young children to be inspired by when they grow up, should I no longer be there to fulfill that task myself. My main passion outside of photography and mountains is push bikes, so much so that where possible I try to combine mountain bike photography with the most atmospheric mountain conditions wherever or whenever life permits. Most often it's at the crack of dawn. This was somehow picked up through Instagram by a journalist working on behalf of an adventure-driven website, and I ended up landing my first ever bit of paid work. Prior to that, I'd always felt like what you might refer as an imposter, and I would never have dreamed of pushing my shots out to any media houses. And inspired by this new precedent and boosted by similar stories from the podcast, I started reaching out to mountain bike publications and adventure journals with my newfound confidence. And I'm pleased to say that I've since managed to get a couple of paid-for double-page spreads in some of the UK's biggest cycling publications, and a long-form piece in a more adventure-orientated publication with an additional one in the works. Wow, what a journey, Niels, what a journey. I suppose it goes to show that whatever life throws at you, you should never give up on your dreams, says Niels, that photography has merits well beyond capturing memories, and that despite its stigmas, Instagram can still be a valuable tool to get some of your work seen. I've attached a couple of recent photos to show my work in front and behind the lens. Here's also the link to Golden Hours, the original piece I wrote about combining photography, mountains and bikes whilst riding the cancer wave, and my first bit of paid work, which you can see here. Well, I've got it's quite a long URL with all the extensions. So what I shall do, as always, is I'm going to put this on the show page today, which you can easily link to through your podcast player app. Just look for the show notes link. Keep up the amazing work. Best wishes from the north. That's from Niels R. Millinks. Well, Niels, sometimes I don't necessarily feel I need to comment. I'm sure there are many friends listening at the moment who'll have their own thoughts, as I do, about you're courageous, and that's the correct word. You're courageous 4.5 years so far, and the work that you're doing on your push bike, some of those hills, oof, and the photography, the photographs that you're making as well. Well, there's one man to play out for some inspiration here from episode 155. Daniel Hughes, who rides the I didn't know they were called this before, the Epic Coals, those huge mountains that cyclists somehow manage to find their way up, often on dirt tracks as well, on dirt track bikes. Here's Daniel, who's had his own particular journey over the last 5-6 years or so, establishing himself as a photographer, finding sponsors, getting his work published. And I thought this sort of dovetailed perfectly, really, with your own message. And here's Daniel making his pictures, and stunning drone ones too, to finding his piece, I suppose, in the world, as you'll find out from this short clip.
A lot of the big climbs I rode just because of the Tour de France and the Giro would go up there, but actually the riding which I enjoy the most is actually not on paved surfaces. I really enjoy riding up gravel tracks and just feeling like you're kind of away from the norm, I guess. And that climb which you found, Pic du Midi, is an extraordinary one, because to get up there, you've already climbed the most famous climb in the Tour de France,
right?
And you're going even higher. It's just extraordinary, and that's why I love gravel bikes or mountain bikes, because it just takes you to even more special places where there's even fewer people.
From episode 155, Daniel Hughes, you can hear more of the adventures that he's made on episode 155. I'll link to that in the show notes, of course. Right, time to talk 365s. 'Tis the season to make 365s. Don't go for the song, Neil, or at least start. And I want to talk about a guide you can download from the show page today, gratis, thanks to the amazing patron, Mike Miller, a name that I'm sure you'll be aware of. We talk about Mike quite a lot. We have our own 365, of course, which is a alternative, I suppose, is the right word to the norm. The difference being that our one is a community one, so we're looking for many to take part. It puts the daily into photography daily. If you've ever thought, I'd love to do a 365, but I'm not sure I could do it every single day, because some people do find it stressful. It's anxious for an anxiety thing for some people, to have to think, right, I've got to do this every day. So that's why I really put the 365 there for the community to join in with, to make photographs or wherever they are in the world. It's almost like a travel document at times. It really is. If you're sending your pictures in, send them to the email address studio@photographydaily.show, 2,000 pixels on the long side. And for this feature, if you can send them in unwatermarked. But do remember, every single time you send me a mail, even if we've conversed in the past, it's just easier while I'm trying to upload things of an evening to the website. If in the email that you send your pictures in with, just remind me of the Instagram or the website or the Flickr that you would like me to send people to see more of your work. But Mike Miller, as I mentioned before, he's one of our patrons, and I'm so thankful for this incredible guide that he's put together, made from his experience of making a 365 across the year. It's a 4-page guide, which you can download from the show page today. And he talks he's just finished his one. And I've got to say, Mike is a man of detail. His photographic eye is super. And we've featured much of his work, his stories, before, but he's written. Well, this guide is fantastic, and also his monthly, which somehow I might try and see if we can, because it's an incredible piece of work, see if we can link to that as well. His experiences as he went through each month. I mean, Mike, it's a book. It's a book, isn't it? Really, this is a book. But we've got, he somehow priced his experience down into 4 pages, which you can read. He talks about taking the stress and the anxiety, as we mentioned a moment ago, out of making a picture-a-day project. He talks about how to shoot, where to shoot, how weather affects the outcome, so many other aspects, including start date, which could so easily be today. I mean, I think if you feel, I can't do a 365, I've missed the boat. Should have been Jan 1st. No, I mean, we didn't start ours on Jan 1st. It was a September project, wasn't it? So you can start your 365 whenever you like. And I will include some of Mike kindly sent me the 12 images, one from each month, that he's been, I suppose, most proud of in the feature, the 365 that he's made across the last 12 months. He sent them to me, and I'll pop those on the show page today so you can see that sort of seasonal change as he goes through his own 365. So that's there today. Download it from the website. There's a link there on the show page. So, my first guest. Well, you heard at the start of the show why I was very keen to talk with Madison Thorne. To introduce this, though, I've borrowed a few words from eastnashvillian.com. Madison Thorne is a 30-year-old artist with a serious look in her eyes and a terrific way with a conversation. Her photographic essay, High Risk Humans, is a deft capturing of nice and normal local folks and some wheels in the music scene, all of whom suffer from this or that malady and are thus more susceptible to the coronavirus. They're the high-risk humans. We all are, but these people, quite a bit more so. And still they have to venture out for bread and milk like everybody else and brave engagement with, here's their words, not mine, maskless douchebags and whatever else might be hanging in the air. Yes, strong words, but I chose this because I think it describes well the feeling of, I think it describes well the feeling of frustration, the feeling of angst. But Madison, well, she's channeled her feelings in a positive direction, as you're about to find out. This is the kind of photographic project that's beautifully simple and deliciously original. Here's Madison Thorne. Born a photographer, raised as a musician. What do you mean by that, Madison?
So I'm a 3rd-generation photographer. My mother was a photographer and my grandmother was a photographer. So I say I was born with a camera in my hand. Kind of, it was a predetermined destiny sort of situation. And then I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Or do you say St. Louis land? Is that the correct thing on this show?
We probably would now.
Yeah, so St. Louis land. And that's very much a music-based town. So I kind of cut my teeth growing up in bars and listening to music and whatnot. And I became a musician myself. And I started taking my cameras to shows I was either attending or playing at.
Well, I've done the what not to do thing that's taught in the very first chapter of the interviewing manual, in that I've given away the setup to the story, really, about the sign that you saw in the crowd on the news that was the catalyst to you making this amazing photo essay project. But I want to hear it from you, because I've read your letter, but I can't add the emotion that you must have felt when you saw that placard on the TV news. Mm-hmm.
So going from that sign and backtracking a little bit, I think for everyone in the world, our original quarantine was pretty much the same. It was shut down, it was locked down. Yeah. Everything came to a grinding halt. And then shortly after that, the term high risk came out. And the CDC uses the term high risk to refer to people with underlying medical conditions that were most likely to be killed if we contracted COVID.
Yeah.
As a type 1 diabetic, I was in that category. It's an autoimmune disease. So I felt, and I had a roommate that wouldn't wash his hands and just kind of didn't care about the whole thing. So I felt
I did read about that, and I wonder what you said to him. You had a roommate that wasn't washing his hands, which was the very basics of what we were all told to do.
Right. It's looking back at it now, it seems silly, but at the time, we had so little information. And so I felt like my life was at risk all the time. I was either in my room or in my yard. There was just nothing else to do. So that was a dark time. And then John Prine died April 11th, I believe. And I am a huge John Prine fan. Yeah. So he passed away. I was so angry and I was so mad. And I thought, Neil, that would be the darkest time for me during the pandemic. And then 2 weeks later, there were protests in downtown Nashville where people showed up and demanded the reopening of businesses. They had felt like quarantine had gone on for too long. So they showed up in numbers, and someone in that crowd made the news. They were on the news and they had a sign that said, "Sacrifice the weak, reopen businesses." And the weak refers to the high risk. It refers to me. It refers to a lot of my friends and loved ones. And like I said, I thought I was already in the darkest point. And then some stranger had decided what my life was worth. And they told me it was worth nothing. So that put me in bed for 2 or 3 days. It knocked me out. And then I remember laying in bed and kind of coming up with this idea that I wanted to take pictures of the high risk in order to, when somebody said sacrifice the weak, I could show them exactly who they were referring to when they said that. Because I think people got caught up in the statistics of the whole thing. So I wanted to humanize the high risk. And so kind of with this crazy idea in my head, I just texted a couple friends and I said that we're high risk. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing here, but can I photograph you? Like, yes, absolutely. And it turned into interviews as well, because I wanted to not only share their picture, I wanted to share their story. And so I spent most of 2020 interviewing and photographing the high risk in my community. At
first, were people nervous about that? Because there was this whole thing about, I can't come within 4 square miles of you. You have to wear you have to wear a mask. You have to be behind a screen. I mean, I remember watching so many television interviews where I couldn't believe the length of the distance that was between people. And here you are making a project specifically about those, and you are in that category too of this high risk.
Yeah, it was interesting. I have a 70 to 200 lens that I have for concert photography, but it came in handy when I was shooting the series because I didn't want to get close to anyone. Nobody wanted to get close to me. I did all of the shoots outside of somebody's home because that's the only That's the only running theme, the continuity throughout the whole project is not only are they high risk, but I'm photographing them at their home because that's where they were all stuck. We couldn't meet at a coffee shop or anything like that.
Did your subjects feel nervous at all?
Kind of, sort of, but more so than anything else. I think by the time I really started doing the series, which was May, people were so desperate to feel seen and heard. You know, that's such a basic human desire to be acknowledged. And by that point, we'd been stuck at home for months, and the social medias and the news and all of that were telling us that we weren't worth anything. So when I came along and said, hey, I would like to photograph you and I would like you to tell me your story, people were just excited to do so more than anything else, to be given that platform.
But it's interesting you talk about self-worth. There were mental challenges and for our purposes, I'm going to talk about the creative industries. And I'm not sure this was a word that was used necessarily in the States, but certainly in the UK, the word key became quite a thing. You were a key worker. Which for obvious reasons we lauded those that were. They were applauded on the streets with pan banging, and then it expanded to grocery stores where they handed out window stickers to those working behind the tills so they could put them in their cars that said, hey, I'm a key worker. And then we had a petrol crisis a little bit later on. It was discussed that only key workers would be able to refuel. And all the time, those in the arts, I think, and I certainly did, began to question whether we'd made some kind of bad life choice.
I didn't mean to laugh so hard, but yeah, of course we did. Nashville, everyone's a musician in this town, and they're all supposed to be on tour throughout the year, and there were no tours. There was nothing.
No.
You guys use the word key. We use the word essential.
Yeah.
Essential workers. So the grocery store workers were essential. The people at fast food joints, the whole thing. But this town stopped, and we didn't know what to do.
No,
we didn't know how to pivot, if you will, or if we could pivot.
Oh, please don't use that word. There's one word.
I hate that word so much. I'm sorry. I take it back. But
there are so many words I never want to hear again in my life. Variant. Variant is, I never want to use the word variant ever again. Pivot is another one.
Quarantine. I didn't know how to spell quarantine before 2020, but I can do it now.
Up to 2020, I thought the only thing that quarantined were dogs when they came in from various countries. But it's now us.
Now we all do it. We all do the dance.
Yeah. I've heard you described as being armed with compassion and a camera. How did your subjects feel as you made these pictures? What did they say to you?
So an interesting aspect for me doing the series is that when I would show up to their home, largely in part, I was the first person they had seen outside of their own bubble in weeks and months. So that made it interesting. Like I said, people were excited to talk. And then I tried, writing out questions originally, and it just didn't work. People wanted to have conversations. So I would just sit and talk with them for anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, however long they needed or wanted to. We talked about what made them high risk, if they had a diagnosis story or, the background on that, their day to day in regards to their illness. That was also fascinating, or what made this series a little different is that I'm high risk as well. So it wasn't someone from the outside trying to figure out what was going on. I was sitting there with them talking about sanitizing groceries and, just maybe spectacle isn't the right word, but just the circus that we were all
you were the story as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in the high risk series.
Yeah.
I'm I'm near the beginning of it, but I had to include my own story because that makes it's an important aspect of the whole thing.
Well, the interesting thing is that those sitting look like they aren't carrying, I'm going to be careful how I say this, but silent messages of malady. There's, that's the thing, isn't it? You just don't appreciate how many people felt this weight of those not understanding their position because they look, and I'm going to use this horrible word, they looked, in inverted commas, normal.
Yeah, that was kind of going back to the statistic aspect of it. You know, someone says high risk and you think, and this is not, you know, correct either, but you think critically disabled, or you think 98 years old, and we shouldn't be sacrificing 98-year-old individuals anyway. But you say high risk and something very specific comes to mind. And that was another point of this series, is to show you that there's so many people that are in this category, and you can't just look at them and tell that they're high risk. You can't look at me and tell I'm a type 1 diabetic, but I fight a battle every single day. And this series definitely calls for empathy. It was kind of the driving narrative throughout the whole thing, is to be empathetic towards your neighbors and towards the people around you, because you don't know what they go through every day.
And it's a very positive piece as well in many places. And words from, there's a beaming Heather who is a 2 times cancer survivor. And she says, we're all experiencing so much sadness and loss on a daily basis. And I feel like we've gained a new appreciation for just waking up and feeling okay. The simple pleasures have become more rewarding. She has her own reservations over other aspects, but it's, and many other stories have a strong positive narrative. But was that a direction of travel you purposefully took with the piece?
Originally, when I was still laying in bed, and you know, the idea originally popped into my head, I was so angry. I was still incredibly furious about that sign. And my first thought was to have the high-risk individuals flipping off the camera. And I quickly tossed that aside because, you know, hate and anger just begets more hate and anger. And then Megan was I interviewed her very early on in the series. And I remember specifically she used the word empathy. And as soon as she said the word empathy, I ditched the anger and I went, that is what I want to focus on right now.
Sean was one of the youngest, if not the youngest.
He was the youngest, yes.
He was the youngest. How old was Sean, by the way?
Sean was 8 at the time.
8. A lad for whom being born prematurely had brought him to the if you want to call it, the high-risk collective. When he wrote, when I grow up, or he said to you, when I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer on Tuesdays, a ninja on Saturdays, and a marine biologist the rest of the time, which I think is a laudable occupation, if he could possibly fit it in. A couple of days ago, he said, I came up with an idea. I want to help nursing students. I would imagine you must feel your life is richer for the people that you photographed and interviewed. Yes,
absolutely. I knew, I'm going to say, a handful of the high-risk individuals in the series. But largely in part, they were all strangers that had reached out to me. And so to be able to go to their home and discuss such a horrific topic and just kind of flesh out these wounds, to start a relationship with someone on such a intimate level was pretty incredible. And I still keep in touch with a lot of these people. You talked about Heather, and I remember when I got to hug Heather for the first time after vaccines, the summer of 2021, we finally crossed paths when it was safe, and I got to hug her. And it happened several times with several different people throughout the series, like being able to maintain these friendships. My life is, as you said, so much more richer for having these people. I was incredibly angry when I started, and it was through interviewing these lovely humans that softened my heart and they reminded me to be empathetic and kind towards the people that you don't want to be kind towards.
Away from the world of COVID, tell me about your passion for photographing music. I mean, we did start out with that, and that is your first love, isn't it?
Yes, in a large way. Photographing musicians just made sense. I could speak their lingo. I understand the way a stage works and the interactions between players and stuff like that. And concerts are so vast and loud, and colorful that I really strive to focus on the intimate moments of the whole thing. When the drummer and the bass player, make eye contact right before you hit a certain part of a song or something like that. That's kind of why I started focusing on black and whites as well. Concerts are huge. They're very large. And if you're focusing on the intimate moments, I found that stripping it of color and, bringing all of the tones down, you make that moment more finite. I can make you focus more on what I would like you to focus on.
You have a fantastic project at the moment, which I know you can't say too much about. But when somebody says I can't say too much about it, it's always like a red rag to a bull, really.
I know.
I mean, the words clothing, Dolly Parton and project, link them all together for me.
You always, you're a fan of getting the punchline out of the way right off the bat, aren't you?
Oh, no, I've done it again, haven't I? Sorry.
I did it again.
Yeah, but you can join the dots.
Yeah. So I'm excited and honored to be part of a team that's currently documenting Dolly Parton's wardrobe. We're archiving it.
That is fantastic.
For the estate.
Wow.
So she has pretty much everything she's ever worn, going way back to her days of just starting out. So we're going through and photographing all of it.
And how long will that take?
It's going to take us months and months. There's a lot, but it's fun to...
I mean, how many outfits are there? Are there hundreds? Are we talking hundreds?
Thousands.
Thousands?
It's a lot. But it's fun to be, a part of history.
Yeah.
Not a part of it, but what we're working with is certainly a part of history.
You can't answer this question, but I just know that you and your colleagues would have been trying bits on.
I cannot answer that question at all. But I will say I'm closer to Dolly's size than anybody else in the team.
Well, when the project's ready to show, please let us know. But and I just want to travel back. It's a juxtaposition, really, with the humour of the last few moments. But I want to rewind for a moment to close our chat about your extraordinary project. And I'm curious, going back to that sign held aloft, inviting those that day to consider sacrificing the weak. I wonder if you met with that person, what you might say now to them.
I've thought about this a lot, and if I could be face to face with them, and it's been almost 2 years since they held that sign, I would ask them how they were doing. And I mean that. I sincerely mean that, because, I see that sign now, and we see anger on the surface, but anger is a secondary emotion. You don't just wake up angry. Something has to spark that anger. And largely in part, everyone that was angry was more so fearful. And so when I think about that woman, I look past the sign and I see the fear, and I understand that fear, because maybe they weren't fearful of getting COVID. They were fearful of, not making any money, not being able to pay bills. How are they going to put food on the table? Everyone was scared. So I think about that woman, and I just want to know how she's doing.
And my thanks to Madison Thorne for her time and talking to us on the show. And of course, I will link to Madison's work and that project, highriskhumans.com, on the show page today. I've had a few conversations with photographers of late who are what I'm calling walking puppies. Walking puppies, Neil. Have you gone all fluffy on us? What on earth are you talking about? Well, I've certainly noticed how walking a puppy makes you very approachable. People want to ask questions. They're not interested in me, of course. I do realise that. But after a while, you find you're talking to people about all kinds of stuff. Apart from the bringing up of a dog. And I think vintage cameras are the same. I mean, I've never been asked so many. It's not vintage as such. Well, I suppose it is, actually. The original X100, that's over a decade now, isn't it, ago? Which, if it were a record, they term a golden oldie record as anything more than 10 years old, which seemed to make sense in the 70s. It doesn't seem to now, but Rolleiflex, that would definitely be a vintage camera, wouldn't it? And on that subject, here's one from Jim Solos in Canada land. Hello, Neil. I've enjoyed the recent episodes with Valerie Jardin. I've followed her podcasts and videos for years. I must admit, I've always struggled with how she and so many other street photographers stress step out of your comfort zone and go talk to people. That's easy for those who are more extroverted, but I am very much more an introvert. There's simply no chance that I'm going to walk up to a stranger on the street and initiate a conversation. Jim, you need a puppy. See? Walking puppies. Actually, I'll do a little bit more about this on the Patron show this coming weekend, tomorrow. But I did meet a chap the other day, and one of the first questions I ask is, what's your dog's name? And he said, Leica. And I thought instantly, I just thought he had to be a photographer. I mean, Mark Power, for example, the Magnum photographer in Brighton, Mark's dog is called Kodak. But he said Leica, and I thought, Leica. Yes, I said, are you a photographer? He looked at me in a weird way, and I thought, have I asked a really daft question? He said, no. I said, it's a camera make, and he said, is it? He said, no, it's called Leica because it's named after he's named after the first dog that went to space. I said, right, okay, well, that's a fabulous reason to be called Leica. And I didn't know the first dog in space was called Leica. And then this chap looked down at Leica, he said, yeah, it didn't end well, but we don't tell him that part. I feel I've told you the story that I was going to actually talk about on the Patron show tomorrow. I'll have something more to add. Though today, says Jim, I was out shooting with my 1939 Leica, not the dog, Leica 3, when a fellow walking in the opposite direction suddenly stopped in his tracks. Oh, wow, he said. That's a really old film camera, isn't it? We carried on a conversation for about 15 minutes, and I learned his name is Lee. He isn't a photographer, but was utterly fascinated with the camera, and we had a wonderful conversation. Lee asked if he could take a photo of me and my camera using his phone. I said, sure. But then how about I take a picture of you? He said, that'll be cool. A picture of me on a film camera. I shoot film for many reasons, says Jim, but a wonderful, wonderful side effect of shooting old vintage cameras is that they are people magnets. Strangers will come up and initiate conversation with me. I've had the most amazing conversations with complete strangers, and then I can always turn that into a street portrait. It makes me smile every single time this happens. So you're right. Yeah, so get yourself a puppy or a vintage camera. They both seem to have the same effect. The photograph of Lee that Jim is talking about here is on the show page today. He says he preferred to keep his mask on for the shot, but you can still see the wonderful smile in his eyes, and you certainly can, Jim. Well, Jim mentioned Valerie Jardin, so yes, let me play some words from Valerie featured in episode 203. And if you want to hear the whole interview, in fact, there's two. It was two episodes. There were 3 parts to it over 2 weeks. So was that 202 and 203, or was it 203 and 204? Oh, Neil, please do your research before ad-libbing. Anyway, but instead of talking kit and the wonderful ability it can be to be a magnet, in terms of vintage anyway, I'd like Valerie. I've chosen where Valerie can expand on the choice that we make in terms of how we make the pictures, in terms of black and white or colour, and how you choose what your frame or your composition, your final picture is going to be. This is Valerie Jardin.
Well, it's actually more difficult to shoot in color than it is in black and white, because you have more elements to be aware of. So it's always about what is the subject? Is the color going to work with the subject? That said, some people only shoot black and white or only shoot color. So then the decision is made up front. I let the subject make that decision. So if the color is part of the story, then yes, and I already set example where, okay, this would make no sense in black and white. I wouldn't even show it in black and white because it would make no sense. It's all about the color. Or vice versa. Sometimes the color is so powerful that the emotion is lost. And I went to Cuba a few years ago, and when you think Cuba, you think color.
Yeah.
Well, I shot more black and white in Cuba than I did color, because for me it was the soul and the emotion and the people, and in the color it was lost. So removing the color will definitely bring back bring the subject center stage, because it will be less distracting. So yes, definitely something that should be made before you press the shutter, because very, very rarely, maybe 1 in 100, would a photograph be as strong in color or black and white. Usually it's very clear. It's either black and white or color. There's hardly ever room for debate. So that's why it should become part of the creative process, not left for post-processing. Even if you shoot RAW, I shoot JPEG because I love the film simulations in my camera. That's why I shoot Fujifilm. So why would I shoot RAW and try to create my own recipe when I love the way it is and I can just fine-tune it in camera? But even photographers who shoot RAW, and I never influence people to switch to JPEG. That's totally up to them. They should definitely put that in their creative process.
Words from Valerie Jardin. Right, I've just come up a path. It's the Photowalk. You knew that bit, but I like to remind you, at some stage, it's the Photowalk. You with your camera, me with mine, a mailbag of your letters, and just spending some time out in the wilds in my case, making some photographs. I have found myself in the middle of nowhere again, with nobody around me, making photographs. I'm rather hoping with my new setup, which has a larger microphone. We'll talk about the whys and reasons for that in the weeks to come, that I might be able to interview more people as I'm making my way along these tracks. But today, isn't it funny? Usually I'm not looking for anybody, but they find me. And when I am looking for somebody, well, right, picture-wise, let's. I've just walked up this track, and it's. I'm not quite so sure that I'm going to be able to bring it out. I certainly hope I can. But the sun is beaming through this sort of line on my left of trees, just going up the path, an incline of path, and sort of this light falling through the trees that's creating this mist. Let's see if I can. I don't think I can pull it out. I really don't. I'm going to do my best. Here we go. Shutter speed 250 at f4, 160 ISO. Come on. Sing for me. Not in the literal sense. Oh, another one of those. Let's try that. Underexpose by stop and a half this time. See, I can see it. I can see it with my naked eye, but I'm not quite getting it photographically. Maybe step back a bit. Maybe I need more of the flare. Yeah, that's helping. Yeah. Maybe. Right. We had a digital drop-in day last Friday. This time last week. Yes, this time last week. And the digital drop-in day was for the patrons who support this show. Not all the patrons, of course. I only had so many hours in the day. And it was fantastic to meet with as many as we did, or I did. It was a 13 and a half hour day in the end. And it was half an hour. We had a half an hour chat scheduled in with every single person that wanted to take part. Well, not quite every single person. I've carried some across over the coming weeks, but as many as I could muster on that day. I practically lost my voice, I think, by the end of the day. But it was such a lot of fun. It really was. And I'm very thankful to our patrons. And I'm going to link to two on the show page today. But the digital drop-in day also revealed some we had some conversations towards the end of our conversation. I'll get this right in a moment. Towards the end of our conversation, I recorded, say, 5-10 minutes of asking a few questions along the lines of, well, one of my favourite ones was, if you were having a dinner party and you were allowed 3 guests, one of them has to be photographic or a photographer, who would you choose to have from history or present at your dinner party? That created some really interesting answers. Equally, well, I suppose along the The more regular question was name me a photographer that's inspired you and why. We talked about photographic books. We did have some fairly left field questions at times as well. And what I'm going to do over the coming months is I'm going to play you so you can hear some of the conversations that we had. I'm going to play those as inspirational snippets, like we played out Valérie Jardin just a moment ago, so that you can hear what photographers who are from a real mix of ability and genre interest, what floats their photographic boat. And we'll certainly do another digital drop-in day, I'm absolutely sure. So a couple of our patrons, thank you to those that support us. For the price of a nice fancy high street cup of coffee or a roll of film per month, you can join the patrons, the supporters who are helping to build the show, make a larger community, and help us to do more with it for other people in the future months to come as well. And I want to thank a couple. John Buskell. John is, John's actually been a mentor of mine as well, because he had a tremendously successful podcast that he produced. I think voiced as well, John. Oh, am I going to get this wrong? John, I'm going to be in trouble with John. About Liverpool FC, which had a huge following, as you can probably imagine. But also he's a fabulous photographer, and I'll link to his Instagram on the show page today. He shoots real estate, he shoots interiors. He's talked about shooting interiors on the show before, but I'm highlighting the work that he does on the street, which is fabulous, which is at John Buskell, Jon. Talk about getting to know places. I feel I know Sweden a tad better thanks to John's pictures. And then Alice Wasserberger, and I'm linking to his Insta as well. Travel is Alice's thing. And there is a wonderful, glorious, misty picture in the woods of a proper-looking spooky place with plenty of history, which is probably closer to my home than yours, I assume, Alice. I may be wrong. Dunham Massey, Manchester. I must say, your passport looks proper stamped. It really does. Right, 2 guests this week, and ahead of my second, I want to dip back into our Facebook group for a message from Chris Rogalski, an important piece about being freelance from somebody who's gone freelance photographically. From Chris, this week has been full of new unknowns, which is forcing me to rethink where I want to be. I lost a position with a local newspaper due purely to budget cuts, which I'm sorry to hear about, Chris, which means I lost a good chunk of income that I thought I was going to have. Frustrating, but it's the life of a freelancer. So I've spent the last few days reeling into LinkedIn, reaching out and networking, not getting responses, getting no's, getting, that's not what this platform is meant for. Never know until you ask, right? He says, ? You're absolutely right there. This morning I woke up and realised you can't spell unknown without no. And this is important because it's the no's you're going to hear along the way. You can manage those, you can learn from those. It's the UNKWN surrounding things that'll kill you, figuratively. If all you hear is no all day, that's a heck of a lot easier to learn how to change a strategy than no response at all. A no means, well, maybe not at this time, but keep in touch. If you decide to cut it off at the heels, then whose problem is it? At the same time, no can be a complete sentence. So he says, learn to read the room. How do you learn from the unknown? Well, for starters, stop treating every situation like a do or die, a must or must not. Unless, of course, it is that kind of situation. Then remove should, could, would from your take action dictionary. Those are tar pit words. At the end of it all, keep a positive attitude as best you can. Nothing kills a sale, a friendship, a working relationship worse than a negative attitude. That's why it's pertinent to look into the mirror every so often and remind yourself what you're doing and why. Some wise words. Thank you, Chris. I suspect that will resonate with a few who wear the freelancer badge, myself included. And the no thing, you've heard me say this in the past, learn to love the word no, embrace the word no. The right times, in the right context, of course. No is, I think, a very powerful drive. Well, it has been for me, a powerful driving force. I've shared this story before, haven't I, about my no book. I've got a couple of no, I call it the no book, but there's more than one. It's essentially a lever arch file full of rejection letters that I received from radio stations, mainly in the UK, but abroad too, from Australia, Sydney, from Boston. I wrote to a couple of places in Africa that I thought would be fantastic. I'm sure I wrote to a radio station in Mombasa. Anyway, they were all no's, they were all rejections, and I kept them. And I remember, I think my dad said, why are you keeping all these, son? And I said, well, partly to remind me not to write to them too often, because I did have a habit of doing that. But also I think I might learn something, because sometimes they tell me something interesting. And the actual fact is, they didn't really. Most of them, nearly all of them, could I possibly put a figure on it, 80, maybe 90% of them were just standard formatted letters that came back to me. The long and short is, I kept every single one, and I'm really pleased I did now, because I think it serves as a reminder that out of all those no's, all it takes is one opportunity, a yes, that opens the door to a fantastic adventure. So thank you, Chris. You did bring back some memories with your mail. Right, second guest this week. I've been talking about chatting with him on the show. He is one of our real supporters from Denmark land, and a darn fine photographer who just happens to be pretty good at it on the street. And that's an understatement. He doesn't really call himself a street photographer. He is an observer, the kind of observer that you feel could be showing you pictures that he's made with his eyes, if that makes sense. You don't actually... Well, what I'm trying to say is sometimes it feels like there's no camera between him and the scene that he's in. You are part of it. It's a rare skill, but one that Dennis certainly has. I'm talking about Dennis Skyam. I bought a book of his, which I thought you might like to hear about, because it's a first published project. And I do love to find out what makes photographers tick when they cast out into the world to share their work on the pages of a real hold it in your hand, tangible item, in this case book. So if you've been thinking about publishing your own work, maybe this today will be a little inspiration for you. Dennis Skyam. Hey, look at this. Mm-hmm. Your book is dedicated, first of all, to the memory of Søren Thuesen, who had this beautiful ability to engage the angle in a composition, much like you do. And I can understand the inspiration, but tell me more about Søren.
Well, he was pretty much the person who got me into photography on a more serious level. We worked in the same building, which I didn't know. I started following him on Instagram, and then I was like, this name, it sounds familiar. And then it turns out that he was sitting directly below me in the online marketing department of the same company. And then we got to chatting, and then we ended up going out shooting together. And I learned a lot from him because, as you say, he had this uncanny ability to see scenes and frames that nobody else really sees.
Well, he does this thing that you do so often. And we talk about this. You look up, or and some of his scenes is looking directly down.
Yeah.
You will come across a frame where the model in his photograph is actually jumping across you, or as if they're standing on a piece of glass above you. Mm-hmm. It's just extraordinarily inventive, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's something I learned from him. Because, it's easy to fall into this trap about, you take the photograph from your own perspective and eye height. And he was always like, try looking up, try looking down, try getting lie down on the ground and try and take a photo.
But does that inspiration, obviously, now that you've worked with him, I would imagine that there's always a little bit of him at the back of your mind, sort of saying.
Absolutely. I think it's rare that if I go out and dedicated a day to shooting, that he's not on my mind at some point. Because because then I'm always looking around being like, oh, that would be something that Søren could really do something cool with.
Well, it's an intriguing, though I suspect, hey, look at this, ironic title for a photographer who flies purposefully, I would say, under the radar to an extent. Because your aim, your goal, and you lay it out in the foreword as well, isn't it? It's not to be, say, magnum or have millions of followers. So what does drive you?
The process. I think that it's the experience of shooting that's sort of the magic ingredient for me. It doesn't really matter if I get, a good image out of it. As long as I get out there, I shoot, then that's enough for me. Everything else is just a cherry on top. And
are you a patient photographer? I mean, I've called it hunter-gatherer in my past. A hunter is someone who goes out, they can't wait to get it, they're almost impatiently photographing. Whereas you seem to me more of a gatherer.
I do both, really. It depends on what the circumstances are. I have a few different cameras I shoot with. So like, for example, today I have my Ricoh GR3 with me, and that's the one I'm always carrying. So, if I'm out with my fiance and we're going to dinner, I definitely have more of that hunter mindset of just like, looking around frantically, seeing if there's something there. If I'm out on my own and I have like my XT3 or X Pro with me, I will happily stand 20 minutes and look at a beam of light and wait for someone to come through it.
So are you ever off duty then? Does that drive her mad that you're constantly looking around?
No, God bless her, it does not. She's also a creative, so she gets it.
You were an earlier adopter to social, and in particular Instagram, but you famously deleted your initial account at something like 100,000 followers.
Yeah.
Which I know most who have an Instagram account would be horrified by the thought of. But you weren't. In actual fact, it seemed absolutely natural for you to want to do that, and I wonder why.
Yes. Well, I tried to really think about what am I getting out of this? Because just getting, a bunch of likes and nice comments, it is just that nice, but it doesn't really get you anywhere. There's no sort of creative or personal development in it at all. So I sort of took a look at it and said, okay, is this actually helping me creatively? Am I going somewhere I'd like to go? And the answer was quite the opposite, that it was actually stifling my creativity. We are humans. We like to be told that we're doing a good job, that what we're creating is swell. But I found myself recreating the same thing over and over again, and I was sort of creatively dying. And the root cause of it was that I was getting kind of addicted to that rush, of having, thousands of likes on a photo that I created.
But as your new profile starts to garner more following, does that mean that the same thing will happen again if you...
I don't think so, because this time I'm not going in blind. I'm well aware of, the risks in it, so to speak.
So what is your advice to those who are on Instagram that feel disappointed to an extent that their work is not being seen by as many people as they would like? Is it important at all?
That's hard to say. That depends so much on the individual. I can totally relate to the feeling that what is the point if there are no eyeballs on my photos? But I would rather have quality over quantity. So, for example, like when I share photos in the Photography Daily group and get comments there, a comment from someone there is worth 50 comments on Instagram, which is just like, nice light, bro, epic.
Well, the book is separated into chapters, loosely chapters, because there is a crossover here and there. We'll start with street photography. Or you don't call it, didn't you just call it the street? You called it, didn't you?
Because I think there's a convention in street photography that it is, it does have some genre conventions that I'm not too fond of. So I prefer to see it as sort of, like streetscapes, might call it. I like to photograph the streets, but it's not like the people that I'm photographing. It's the environment, the situations that the people are, of course, a part of. Without the people there, it wouldn't matter at all. But it's not like I'm doing this sort of classical street photography of going out and finding interesting characters and composing a frame around them. It's always about finding the frame first and then seeing if there's someone walking through it or
Do you engage with people ever for street portrait work? It doesn't feature in your book as such, no.
No, never really. And sometimes they engage with me afterwards. They're like, hey, did you take my picture?
Well, how do you deal with that then?
Usually it's not a problem. I think in all the years I've been shooting, I've had maybe like 2 or 3 incidents where someone was like, hey, please don't take my picture. And then it's just, okay, then I won't.
You seem to have a great interest in architecture, shapes, geometry, which also form a great deal of your work with people as well on the street. I'm thinking of I've got it here. I'm thinking of the picture, the lady in red climbing and I did count every single one, by the way, although I doubt, I bet you'll go back now and find an extra step, but it looks to me like 53 steps she's climbing. Looks like she's coming out of something like a metro. Long steps going up. She's in a red coat. The only colour part of the picture, really, although this is not spot color, this is a color photograph.
It is, but like, for example, this photo is I was quite surprised that it even turned out, because I'm shooting it as I'm going up in the elevator on the metro station.
Right.
So I had my camera with me, and I chose to take the elevator up. And then just as the doors closed, I saw this lady starting to walk up, and I just, pointed the camera and just burst shot all the way up through the elevator. And there was like 2 shots in there that were completely useless.
I would not have known, because that is in essence a grab shot. What a grab shot.
And I mean, she's perfectly posed in it, because the old Copenhagen metro stations are very monochrome. There is no color.
I see American flags appearing in there. Is there a country you prefer to photograph in?
I think I prefer to photograph in Denmark, to be honest.
Why?
Because I feel comfortable in it. I can hunt. I can sort of, from a cultural point of view, I sort of know the way people move about in the streets. Whereas if I go to America, or even if I go to Britain, it's different. Which is of course also exciting in its own way, because part of the Danish culture is this concept of privacy in public. I don't know if that's something you have in Britain, but personal space, and it's like everyone is walking around in their own little bubble, and sometimes you catch people being shook from that little bubble, and if you can catch that in a photographic frame, I think that's a really magic moment.
Curating this book, then, did you have a plan? It feels to me like, and forgive me for being quite so blunt, that there wasn't really a plan, because there is a misc at the back.
Absolutely not. No. And like a lot of the things that I refer to as like my projects, like staircases. Yeah. It's not like I ever went out with the plan of like, now I'm just going to shoot staircases. Yeah. But when I'm out and about, I find them and I photograph them. And then at some point, you have the volume that you realize I actually have kind of a project going on, even if the beginning of it hasn't been, on purpose.
The masks in the book, I suppose it's a nod to the time in which we live. It's not it's certainly not a lockdown project. No. Would you refer to this as that part of the book as your COVID project?
Yeah, because if COVID had never happened, this project would never have happened. I mean, wearing masks in public isn't a thing in Denmark. Well, it is now, but it wasn't before. So it was quite jarring.
How did that time affect you?
Yeah, well, we never had like a really hard lockdown. So there was never like, you can't move, more than a few miles from your home or anything. So I was still able to go out and shoot if I wanted to. But I mean, of course, the whole thing was just a little bit demotivating. Like the company I worked for at the time closed down for 3 months. So I was just, rummaging around at home, which didn't really afford me much inspiration. So I didn't really want to go out. But then like at the end of it, it started to slowly creep back, and the camera started to look a little bit more interesting again. So I actually started taking photos out of my living room window. And
the irony, hey, look at this, as I mentioned right at the start, that's not lost on me, because you're not a showy photographer.
No.
So why, hey, look at this?
Because of exactly that. I like sort of the juxtaposition, because it's so much against the way I am as a person. I would never be like, hey, look at this. So I think it's sort of a funny title.
Do you think all photographers should, or rather maybe a choice word, could look at producing a book?
I think that once you reach like, I guess, a volume of work, then definitely, because you are going to find commonalities between some of the photos that you shoot. And I think you can collect that into like a cohesive collection that you could publish. For me, at least, I was very hesitant about making a book because I'm only 36 years old. So I've grown up in the digital world and I've never, like, shot a roll of film or anything like that. But I have to say that after making this book, it's not the last time that I'm going to go and print a bunch of my photos.
You might not know of this expression. I use it a lot in my life. It's a Scottish expression, really. It's like painting the Forth Bridge, which is a huge railway bridge in Scotland. So you start at one end. Once you've painted it, you have to go right back to the start. So it's a sort of cyclic project as such. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've used so many images in here. Do you feel like you're having to start all over? Or is there a slight library that we haven't seen as yet?
Well, there's a lot of photos that didn't make it into this book, so I'm already planning if they should be included in the next one.
And though it might seem unfair to ask, is there a picture within the book that's not so much a favourite, but a most definite personal pick, Dennis? Perhaps a moment that you'd fondly recollect, the kind of picture you can hear or you can smell.
One of the ones that I actually really like is on page 20. There's this photo from a bar in Dublin where the bartender was making this, I don't know which drink it was, but it involved burnt cinnamon.
Oh, yes.
So as he was setting fire to it, the whole place was just smelling like cinnamon. And I'm like looking up and like, what the hell? And I see this cloud of smoke. And I raised the camera and I was about to take the picture, but then I noticed the woman who was being served the drink, she was like about to turn her head. And I just waited just that split second to push the shutter to get her to actually look at me. And I got exactly the shot that I wanted. I was so pleased with it. It's one of those moments like when you click the shutter, you just know it's there.
Words from Dennis Skyam. And I'll link to Dennis's book, of course, though. Make sure you take a good delve through his new Instagram, which is also linked to on the show page today. And that's it for another week of walking. A play-out song in a moment, but there's a few new things happening for 22. I mentioned the inspirational words from our patrons a moment ago, but I'm hoping, though I suspect it may be later in the year as we start to trip Omicron up from behind unceremoniously. Oh, sorry, was that me? Oh, I do apologise. No, I won't be helping you up. I'm hoping to take more walks with photographers where I can, of course. And on that note, you ready for a long shot? On that note, if you're in Norway land, in the Peer Gynt Mountains region, which I think is about a 60-kilometre drive, that mountain road, isn't it? So let me focus it just a bit more. In Golla, which is Gala, but I think you pronounce it Golla, don't you? Golla? Everybody from Norway land now currently saying, Neil, that is not the pronunciation, but I know where you are. Long shot, but if you are in that region, there's no reason. I mean, why we shouldn't have somebody in that region, because I know we have some listeners from Norway land. So if you're in that region, then I'd be delighted to take a snowy walk with you, or bring your skis and we'll try a photo ski, though I suspect you're going to be amused by my rather English style of skimanship. The last time we went was, and I sincerely hope we're going. I mean, I know it's harder to plan things these days, but there's some wood to touch. Hold on, let me go over here. There we go. We've touched some wood. That means it has to come true. But so last time we went was literally a month, pretty much a month to the day before the politician, who shall not be named for some people these days, had said, stay inside, lock your doors, don't go out, except for us. Neil, don't do it. Don't make a political joke. I'm not, no, except for us. No, don't do it. At our part, no, don't do it. No, I won't do it. But, yeah, so it was literally a month to the day. And I remember our Jack, our eldest, he was literally walking, because the news was out and people were starting to wear masks. And Jack was walking actual rectangles around people wearing masks, bless him. And then, that was the last time I got on one of those metal tubes called an aeroplane. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to being out there. And now, I am not the finest skier. And I know I've mentioned this before, by a long shot. But there is some irony about skiing that is not lost with me now. I always used to say, because the family loves skiing. They adore skiing. I love being there. I love being there. Love the countries we go to. But there's a part of me that thinks, can't I just stay in today? I'll light the fire, get the hot chocolate ready for you, go for a little walk while you throw yourself down a 1 in 3 with your newly waxed bits of wood on the end of your feet to make yourself go faster. But there was always a part of me that used to say, must we? What if I sort of break my ankle? I wouldn't be able to work for 6 weeks. I mean, luxury not being able to work for 6 weeks when I consider the 2 years that I've literally not been able to properly work as a photographer due to all kinds of restrictions and events being cancelled and rescheduled, postponed because those wanting to hold them couldn't do it in the fashion they were allowed to do. So 6 weeks, luxury. So yeah, if you're in that part of the world, that'd be lovely to meet up, and we can go for that ski. I always manage to escape from the family at some stage, even though I'm not the best skier. We have the rule, nobody skis alone, but I always manage to, at some stage, lose them, and it's fabulous. And Norway's particularly good for this, being in a country which, this particular resort actually in Golla, which doesn't have 1,000 skiers bombing down the hill after you. It's wonderful sometimes just to stop, and it's absolutely silent. And I am going to be taking you with me. It'll be a photo ski, or in my case, probably a photo fall over at some stage or another. The other bit of news, I got a bit caught up on skiing there. The other bit of news is something I'm hoping you may be able to help with. If you enjoy the shows, if you like what you hear, if they speak to you, if they touch you or move you in some sort of way, when you think about the letters, I'm hoping that you may have somebody you can share this show with. And I'm going to share you a new website address. In the past, it's always been a case of you having to copy-paste a URL for any given show on the show page. But now I have a new website address that connects straight to the episodes page, so no / anything, which is the episodes page has been updated to explain to anybody who comes to it brand new what this podcast, this very different kind of photography podcast, is all about. And that website address is, remember this, all the W's, photowalk.show, and hopefully that will be easy to remember. It's a photo walk and it's a show with a dot in the middle. If you can share that, I'd love you to invite more photographers like you, like me, to come on these walks and share their stories too, or simply listen to the inspiration from the amazing writers and guests that we have. So photowalk.show. If every single person listening today could invite just one other person, that'll help us grow, of course, but more importantly, it'll help me to tell more stories and bring our community ever closer together. So whatever their interests, whatever kind of photography they do, whether they do it lots, whether they do it a little bit, maybe they're just walkers, and take the occasional, and I will call it purposefully, snap, because there's nothing wrong with it, with the iPhone. Then if you can share it, photowalk.show. Right, a song to play out on the show. Well, this week's play out song is the type I'd love to play if I had a radio show now, that could play the sort of thing that radio stations don't necessarily playlist. We actually have a wonderful radio station in this country, in the UK, that we're lucky to have. It's called BBC Radio 6 Music. To say the choice of the music and the presenters is eclectic at times, I think is an understatement. But I always get to learn so much more about the music that I wouldn't always choose to listen to by listening to that station, in terms of style and accent and genre. And this song today it's a very short song, but I was really taken by the clever wisps. I'm going to call them wisps in the middle, and the reverse bits too. You'll recognise it as it comes along, which does make it sound in some respects like the instruments the instruments are raining, but I just wish it was 3 times as long. It's called Gift Shop, and it's by Eric Andrew Taylor.
Wish I could show you the world, what you mean to me, so write you this song. Wish I could buy you every gift from every single gift shop, but it wouldn't be enough. Wish I could hold back the rain. We'd walk through the park like it's summer. I can't breathe you in.
That's Eric Andrew Taylor and Gift Shop. Marvellous. And that's it for this week. My thanks to Madison Thorne and Dennis Skyam. I feel broadly educated by them both today. Thanks to those of you who are patrons, which you can join through the link on the website, photographydaily.show. And for those wonderful supporters who are, tomorrow on the More Show, we're going to hear a little more from Madison Thorne, but nothing particularly photographic, nothing at all photographic actually, just the stuff we talk about when we finished, well, chatting photography. It's a bit silly, but why not? Also, Leica, the first dog in space, as I said, and why my own dog could be the start of a project about people, for me anyway. Being attacked at a wedding, I mean, come on, wedding photography should not be dangerous. And my picture on a page comes from Eugene Richards' Dorchester Days. Next week, the landscape great Charlie Waite is here. Say that quickly, it's a tongue twister. I was supposed to be walking with him today, but rain stopped play on that one with his schedule this time, but we still intend to make that walk another time. Having said that, I do still have an interview with him, and I'll be armed with questions that you have provided from our Facebook group. So you got to ask some of the questions for this one. Music on the show from the incredible artlist.io, and I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you, and talking with you next time. Oi, car. Yes, I'm on my way back. I was hearing you talking about Norway. How did you do that? I'm omnipotent. The omnipotent Kia. Yeah, I don't suppose you want to share the story about the 4x4 and the time you used the kid's blanket to get you out of a hole? Yeah, I'm not great driving in snow. I put the car into a ditch and used one of the kids' blankets to put underneath the tyre so we could sort of power our way out. Whose blanket? Our Jack's. And he's never ever forgiven me. I know. He hasn't seen that blanket for, I don't know, 10, maybe 11 years. But he's never forgiven me. I wouldn't either. Oh, thanks, Carl. That's very charitable of you. Come on, let's make our way home.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.